first up on the agenda is item 1.01, the ex officio student member of the board. Does anyone have any comments or concerns? I do. I was thinking we could have up to 3, but I think probably the best thing would be to have one appointed member and maybe a couple alternates.
They're appointed also.
Oh, okay, but I mean, only.
You can have one ex officio student board member, and you can have 2 alternate student board members in case the student, the student board member is unable to come to a meeting or attend to the responsibilities.
Okay, so that would be only one actually at the meeting, is that correct?
I think that's what you're envisioning.
Yeah, that's what I would. And then the selection process.
2 alternates. And it's, you don't care if they're juniors or seniors or which of the NFAs they come from, correct?
Go ahead.
No, that's,
Oh.
I'm just trying to understand.
As long as the student body is represented, but I thought maybe they could have an advisory group so that they get all. Oh, I'm sorry. Can I finish? I thought maybe they should have like a structured advisory group to ensure that the board, to ensure board input and maintain efficiency.
With the advisory group, is this a student advisory group?
Yeah, or it could, you know.
I don't know, I don't understand what the advisory group will be doing.
Well, like the student government, maybe, you know, just so that they get input from a lot of, you know, from around the district.
But isn't that the responsibility of the student board member to make sure that they're representing the interest of the students?
Well,
And it's also the responsibility of the student government.
Right.
So, yes.
So, but I mean, it could be like a group effort, but one unified voice for that group effort.
I don't know that we decide that. You decide how you're going to choose, you know, what method is going to be used to choose the ex officio student board member and alternates.
Oh, okay. No, but I'm just saying the one person can get advice.
Yes.
And help from a group.
Yes, but that's the way, that's their responsibility, and that's how they will do it,
Okay.
rather than the board dictating
right,
what
right.
they have to
Oh,
do. That's all
sure.
I'm saying.
Yeah, sure. Ms. Peterson?
So Dr. Bond also invited and spoke with the principals, and we actually have the class advisor who participates and runs student government for the 3 classes. So a part of that process, she wanted to make sure that you know, the board understood the structure of student government, and the principals also gave feedback. So Mrs. O'Neill is here to kind of share kind of what some of the structure and ideas that she spoke with the principals for the board's consideration. You can come up to the table. You can come up to the table and you have to speak. Well, it has to be recorded. I'm sorry. So the table, if you want to sit at the table and, because I don't think that we have the other microphone set up.
Put it on, which I always.
Thanks for having me. I really just came with a couple of points from watching the last planning committee meeting and some discussion at the board meetings, along with reading the first draft of the policy itself. Just for your consideration, and also give an opportunity if anybody had any questions. So I have been with the Crinarian Council for almost a decade, and this is my 3rd year of running the whole student organization for the 3 campuses. So some of my points, kind of just scattered in a different order, is one, the idea of making sure that it's established for the attendance of what the expectation of the students are, how long they have to be here, et cetera. Do they have to go to both meetings each month, and stuff? And I guess there is a handbook that Ms. Peterson was talking to me about, laying out like the outline, the responsibilities and expectations for the students. One suggestion that came up when I was talking to administration would be to, like in the past, move the agenda item of the HR to the end again, like it used to be. So this way, if you guys have to go into executive session, because it's typically done about personnel issues, that could be at the end, possibly, in order for the students to be able to leave and not have to wait during executive session, because it is a school night. And I'm going to tell you, the students, I have over 100 involved in student council with me. They are, my head spins to know how much stuff they're involved in. It's amazing that they find the time for it. I'm so proud of them. Another item would be, my suggestion, just coming from me, is that we have a very tight, organized student council base. We have our senators, then we have our officers for each grade, and then we have the 3 executive council members. The 3 executive council members have had to at least been on student council for 1 year, and they are seniors, all 3 of them. Now, they're elected in by all 3 campuses voting. I had almost 1,000 students vote this year for student government. We really make a push to really get a student voice. So they are really selected by a huge population of the students. Now, the 3 students that run for this position, it could become a requirement for them in order to apply for the election that's held in May, that this becomes a part of their expectations to be on as a representative of the Board of Ed. So they would run with that idea in mind that they're going to fulfill that. I spoke to the 3 young students that will be stepping in as the executive council members, to not speak for them without having had this conversation. All 3 of them, if that was the avenue you would go in, are very excited about the idea of sharing the responsibility of being the 3 members that rotate through and be able to sit on the board. And then this way, every May, I have the new winners. And then they could be announced, and then, for the following school year, be appointed in the end of June to start in July. So that was another idea. And I was going to, if that was the avenue you guys chose to go, to move my student council meetings to the 2nd Tuesday of each month for next school year, in preparation to have one final conversation prior to one of the 2 board meetings that they would be coming to represent. We did come last year and did presentations and rotated through my officers and some of the senators with the highlights of the 3 campuses. I know that we don't really have a lot of participation from the West Campus, but Ms. Stukes and I talk on a regular basis and always represent the West Campus and get their input. I typically go over once a year and speak at their Friday meetings to try to recruit for Club Day and other clubs, including student council, student involvement from that campus. But they're so busy with their internships and stuff, sometimes it's a little difficult to get out of the program of the big picture learning. And I guess that is it. So if you guys have any questions that you might want to consider.
Ray?
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you, Ms. O'Neill. When I spoke to a couple of different grades, class officers, over the last few months about this, just seeing them at sporting events and stuff like that, and they had expressed that they would prefer, the way it's written here, where there's 1 member per campus, because you guys do meet only once a month, and we do have the 2 board meetings a month, and the expectation is they would, representative would be here at each regular meeting. They were concerned because of the once a month meeting, they wouldn't be getting all the issues in a timely manner from the other 2 campuses. So they had expressed 3. And that would sort of take care of the alternates thing, because you'd always have at least 1 member here, hopefully. As far as choosing, I don't know. You're in charge of that. I imagine the students are perfectly capable of picking who the representatives would be. But that was the one thing that they'd expressed to me, the desire for a representative from each campus. Thank you.
Victoria?
My only question is that it narrows the base down to only 3 people from what I'm hearing. So my question is why it couldn't be opened to any student that wants to run as a board member. So we're factoring this down to just student council members or just the Cornerian Council? That's my question, because I feel like, agreeing with Ray, if we had one from every building, like, can you touch on, so the president, vice president, and what's the other for Cornerian?
For the executive council, there is a president, a vice president, and a secretary.
Are they all from one campus?
It changes every year.
Okay.
Ms. Peterson?
So, and this might be a question for Margot, in the recommendation from NISBA and from New York State in general, do they recommend or advise or require that the ex officio board member has some participation in student government? No. No, okay.
It's really the Board of Education's decision, the way the policy exists and the selection process.
So can we talk as a committee, like, what are your thoughts on opening it up to, like, the whole, not just the student council?
My rationale for the student council was there's already a vehicle there for picking their leaders, for the people they have decided to speak for them. So in my idea, that's, a natural place to pull from. They can decide amongst themselves, who are the best to represent them. That's my thought process. It shouldn't be closed, if they decide somebody else, but like I said, that vehicle's already there to pick their representatives. So I just thought it was the easiest course.
So like I said, I just came to share my opinion. And if it was going to be through student council, where I can't remember, to be honest, it was either Mr. Bergarelli or Ms. Peterson had said that, there should be somebody like an advisor or a coach, I believe was the term that was used at the last policy meeting, to help work with the students, to gather their thoughts and to prepare them to come in and represent the student body. I don't know who that would be if the students were not part of the government, because it wouldn't be me. So there would have to be, an adult assigned to work with them.
Can I just ask, is this just at the high school level? Yes. That's it? Okay, thank you.
Can you, because you have the election in May for the next year, can you tell me if they're from 1 building, 2 building, 3 buildings
This year.
this year?
This year, they happen to all be from the main campus.
So that's just my concern. If all that were voted in were from 1 building, how do we then pick from others? Is it that, I guess that's what we have to discuss. Would there be a vote in every building for a certain time frame? Because I think this has to be done by July 1.
Well, my suggestion would be to have one of the 3 members, even though they do go to school at the main campus, to be assigned to a building. And senior year, typically, they have either the morning or the afternoon where they don't have classes anymore because they don't have as much of a caseload. So then they would be able to work with a subcommittee at each building to get together for the information for the board meeting. And touching on what Mr. Bergarelli had said, yes, we only have 1 student council meeting, but we do have many other meetings where the executive council will meet. And then just grade levels meet as well. So there is one all meeting that is the regular full student council, but there are many other meetings that transpire throughout the month.
Ms. Peterson?
So, Margot, just for clarification, they have to be elected by the student body?
No. No. That's just one of the options. There could be a selection process through the principal. It could, you gave her the clip.
Well, because I'm just wanted to
Actually-
make sure, because I'm thinking,
The small city school districts
Yeah.
cannot have the entire student body electing the student board member, so you have the other options.
okay. I'm sorry, I just have another, I think that also because if there is a representation concern that you're bringing up, we do have a we would have to have a mechanism and really talk about if this is going to be separate, if it is going to be another governing body over those group of students to help, where this is the executive council and this current student government structure is already preset. So we have that, and those students have been in government. They've been they've been a part of board meetings. They understand agendas because they're doing that in their practice of student government. So if we go outside of that, there may be additional things that the district would have to do to equip those students to participate in a like fashion.
Ray, did you have a question?
No, well, just one thing, because the sticking point, right, is the representation of each campus. And right now, with the election results, the way they came out, everybody's at Maine. As far as July 1st goes, for compliance, we have our people. You know what I mean? Like we could always go back to the beginning of next year and saying, okay, we have our president is our primary, with the vice president being the automatic alternate, and the secretary being an automatic alternate, but we need a representative from each campus. So there could be, first month in or something like that election to set those two representatives if that's what the student body wants, if they want a representative per school. I mean, I'm really fine with leaving it up to you, Ms. O'Neill, and the students, how they want to pick.
And to piggyback what you're saying, Mr. Bergarelli, is that, moving forward, if maybe we just wanted to look at it this way this year, especially because there are possibilities for changes with the campuses and the CTE building opening, that the policy would have to be looked at again and revised depending on that structure. Moving forward 1 year, 2 years, even 3 years down the road, there could be many changes. You never know what's going to happen. But this way, we could even have another discussion with like a group or with a student government about adding an element to make sure that there's 3 people and starting another addition to the officers for each grade and the executive council, where even the officer could also run for the board member type thing, but it would be one from each campus type element added in. So it's something that we could grow from. If okay.
Yeah, usually, if you have, some school districts have more than one high school. You have one high school with 3 buildings. But I know with a couple of the school districts we represent, it's usually, in those situations, they actually have an application and selection process, and the building principals interview and, often make that determination. So there are lots of different ways of doing it.
Victoria?
So I think that with respect to time, school's over, no?
Yes.
Right. So I think right now we're kind of in a position where this would have to be the starting point, and then the discussion during the year would have to be how it's modified for equity and all that. But again, we're talking about 3 students that were voted in by their peers, and I don't see any issue with that. I just want to make sure every building gets the representation. And just something to think about. I mean, these children live every day in these buildings, so that is important to have that experience of being in the building. So I think for time's sake, we do and we should follow through so we're compliant. But please have that discussion in the next year about how that changes.
Ms. Peterson?
And I do strongly recommend that the board really, with student council and student government in general, I think it's a great way for students for 4 years to be exposed to just governance in general. So they understand elections, they understand the voting process, they have to do their own petitions and different things like that. So there's certain skills that student government, not say I was a student government kid, I was, that an advisor, that they learn through the club process that would be beneficial to the board.
Ms. O'Neill?
So before I leave, would that be something, depending on how you guys go, to have like the subcommittees where the representatives, work with a different building to make sure that their voices are represented, and to move forward to have the discussions to, I'll boost the recruitment from West to make sure that the students are brought over. And again, Ms. Stooks is always really great working with me for those elements. And then this way, we can start to bridge that gap and then move forward for next year if you guys are open for it. And before I would leave, I'll leave my notes and the 3 students that were elected to the Executive Council, just to have them with Mr. McCoy.
So would that mean that the executive council would appoint themselves? Would as the selected people to be brought to the board to be the student board members?
That was just my recommendation.
It can't be someone who's selected by the entire student body in general.
It would be my recommendation for the 3 of them to be the representatives.
Okay, but it really should be the student government.
That is me.
You're not the student government, you're the advisor.
But I already spoke with them.
I just want to make sure that it's the correct process.
Yes, it is.
So you're saying that the students can't vote on this?
The student government should be able to, yes. It's the entire student government, though, not just the 3 execs.
Right, but my point was that this process is already done, and there's no more school left to push forward with that. So I want to make sure that we're not violating anything, because we're saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, that the Cornerian Council will be the 3 selected members. Correct, right?
To be in compliance for July 1, you know, that's already set up. And, you know, going forward, just adjust it as it needs to be, you know.
Ms. Peterson?
I was going to say, I know that there was input in her decision from the superintendent and from the acting superintendent and the principals, that was a part of that process. And I definitely think to get the representation, students always come up with creative ways of making sure that it definitely should be a discussion for student government to make sure that each campus is represented in some way from here, whether that's in the report out from the student that you're sending, or you know, if there's a way that each campus can give feedback to the student council, but there would be a majority. And again, this is just the starting point.
So then I recommend we move this to a second read and adoption, because we already did a first read, right?
Yeah, but we have to make sure that what's in the policy is what, exactly, so it may need to be tweaked.
So point of order, what's going forward to the board for the second reading? Because we need to be on the same page about what we're sending to the board.
Okay.
So I need direction from the committee on what's moving forward.
What's moving forward is,
I believe this policy, as it's stated, the only thing not in here is who the students would be.
Yeah, naming the current executive student body.
So would that have to be added into the policy?
So
I don't think that's an option. I think it says that the student government can, you know, select.
Correct, that's what it says. So we don't have to be more definitive.
Ms. O'Neill, I have a question. So the student government, the kids got elected to be executive council members from the student government?
From the entire student
So that's what the issue is. So in the city school district, the student board representative has to be a selection by the student government, not by the student body.
And that was the discussion afterwards, to have the 3 of them represented if that was what the board chose.
Got it. All right. So then we'll be compliant once the student government then votes these people in, as if that's the way the board chooses.
Correct.
Right. But the committee still needs, we still need direction on what we're sending to the board next week.
But do you understand what that means for you? Okay.
You have to have a meeting.
Yeah. You could do like a, yeah, like, yeah. All right. Okay.
so just to be clear, it's going to be 1 student member with 2 alternates, or,
Right.
The 3 executive council will split the time.
oh, excellent, okay. Thank you.
Yes, it was a discussion, and I can have a vote. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Margot, do you know what changes they would like? Because this needs to be incorporated by legal, because at this point I'm keeping out of it.
I think that's correct. I will give it a shot. I just want to make sure that the student government is the body that's actually voting for the individuals who will serve as the student board members, and not the 3 executive people deciding that they're going to be the ones who are doing it.
So this policy says the board will have 3 ex officio student board members.
But we're changing that.
We're going to change that
Well, we're
verbiage
changing that if that's what we want to do.
to 1 and 2 alternates.
Right, and it doesn't, and I don't know if we're saying that they have to be representative of each of the 3 buildings or not.
That's what we need the answer on, Ms. Bello. What's the committee's decision on that?
Right now, I don't think we can put that in there.
Or we need to know 1 board member, 2 alternates?
Yes.
Yes.
That's moving forward. Okay.
Yes.
And they will be, they can attend meetings on an alternative basis, or if the selected student board member can't be there at a given time, one of the alternates would come, and then for the next time that happens, the other alternate, to give them all a chance, like on a rotational basis.
I think we also should be super clear. Let's say if they're not coming or can't come or are sick, I think that they should be able to report to their advisor, not the board, that they would not be here, and they figure that part out.
I think it probably should be to the district clerk or to the superintendent.
Well, maybe Ms. O'Neill would report to.
I mean, it could be to her also, but I think that it has to be somebody who knows that they're not going to be there or they can't be there.
Right, so that Ms. O'Neill would then report to Matthew or,
I think that that's some of the expectations, and that's like part of why she asked for the guide, to go over the expectations as well with the student and the parent, so that everyone's clear about what the expectation, but we can follow up. And then also the other thing that the committee is asking is that next year that we kind of revisit to ensure that they figure out a process to get all campuses for the following year. That's what we're deciding? Okay.
are you good with that? Okay.
Okay, next up, item 1.02, policy 8113, extreme heat condition days. Did anyone have any questions, or?
No, this is a mandate. This is a new mandate from the governor and the legislature, so.
Okay, so we can move this forward for a vote?
I have a question. So what happens if the room is 90 degrees and this doesn't get followed? What is, because,
It
That's
does
my
say to
question.
the extent practicable, but it does say that if it reaches a certain level, you're supposed to do the heat mitigation. That's the beginning.
Right.
The various heat mitigation pieces. If it's anticipated it's going to be 88 degrees, you start the heat mitigation measures earlier in the day, so hopefully you don't get to the point where it's 88 degrees. If it hits 88 degrees, then there are also things in there having to do with you let them go in and out of like air-conditioned areas. You do what you can. Every building is going to be different.
would it be possible to get some kind of status report from Mr. Velez at the conditions that we're at right now?
Ms. Peterson?
Okay, so I know the extreme heat I think it started actually last school year around this time. We had really extreme heats. We had some extreme heat. So once the board passes the policy, then there'll be a regulation. Customarily, what we do, if there is an ongoing concern, we do use alternative air-conditioned spaces within the district. We start to make sure that we, take the blinds. Sometimes we don't turn off AC, so all that we can put in the regulation so it's clear for the board to see the steps that we take. I know that in several buildings we're able to kind of have that view of what we're seeing, and we're replacing and updating systems to make sure that we come into compliance with this. And we also have the method of health and safety committee where, some of those concerns, like if we have a classroom where an air conditioning has been broken for, sometimes it's reported to us with union leadership and Mr. Velez to try to remediate those things. So after this, that we can put a regulation together that kind of says the steps.
Ray?
I hate to muddy the waters in this and draw this out, but 82 degrees, we have a plan here in place. What if it's 80 degrees and 90% humidity? You know what I mean? 90 and 0% humidity is more comfortable than 80 and 100, 90% humidity. I mean, we're trying to follow the direction of the state, but at the same time, what are we actually doing for the comfort of the students when we don't hit this threshold,
So we experienced this at the end of last school year where it was extreme heat the last 2 weeks of July, with the high humidity, thunderstorms, all of that. And at that time, the superintendent decided whether or not we had early releases to combat the heat that we were experiencing, and we took mitigation steps of making sure like the air conditioners ran consistently and different things, and to try to make sure that we keep it cool. In some spaces, we like moved to auditoriums and different things. But if it is extreme and the building is that hot, then it becomes a health and safety issue, and we dismiss early.
That you have to take into consideration extreme heat days in terms of when you're developing your calendar, just as you would emergency snow days, for example. And I think that's, you have to have your at least 180 days of student time so that you get all of your state aid. It would be a disaster if you did not meet that requirement. So that's just another thing to think about. And I don't know what's going to happen with the quote-unquote give-back days because of when you don't use a lot of snow days, because you won't know. The hottest days are usually September and June. So that's just a consideration.
And I think last year, it's definitely a great point for us to make sure that we have the 180 days, the 990, and that's why half days and early dismissals are used, so that we can account for the days and the hours for instructional time.
So we're going to move this forward for a vote.
Yeah, it would be a first read and adopt.
First read and adopt.
Agreed.
Okay, item 103, the use of internet-enabled devices and other electronic devices. Any questions on these? Ray?
Thank you. So this is now from the state. How close were we in compliance to what we already had, comparing, to what the state now is putting down?
What the state is saying is that you cannot have, except in certain limited circumstances, you cannot have internet-enabled devices of any kind turned on during the entirety of the student instructional day, meaning bell to bell, from the first bell to the last bell. So it's a question of where you're going to put them. A locked locker. I think Matthew told me that, or Mr. McCoy, excuse me, that that you have yonder pouches for most of the students, or if not all of the students.
I think it's ninth grade.
So,
Ms. Peterson?
So, how far we are in compliance? This mandate from the state is a little bit more restrictive than we have been, and this 50. We've looked at this many, many times because there's a lot of different things with cybersecurity as well as just attention during instructional time. So it is a little bit more restrictive. At our high school and our middle school levels, we have introduced yonder pouches as a means to try to make sure, but with the addition of internet-able devices, this is another thing. All the watches and iPod. What is it called? Earbuds and all these different things that also use internet can also be an area of concern. So there's definitely, some things that we definitely need to address, as well as the elementary schools, right? So on the elementary level, we have had it where we don't have yonder pouches. We ask students to power off their devices and keep them away for the day. This kind of spells it out as well for the school day that they should not have them on. On them at all. And I know that we definitely still have some examination security things where students are so used to having their devices that it's a testing thing. So, we're still also working with our students to ensure that they have this.
Ray?
Thank you. I know the way some students skirted this was by bringing their own laptops, their own iPads. But when we talk about the internet portion, it goes back to accessibility to the internet in the buildings. They wouldn't necessarily have access, right, if they brought their own devices, or would they just tether them off their phones, I guess, and do it that way?
This is one of the things that we definitely wanted to speak to the board about regarding bring your own devices, because exactly what you said, sometimes there is a circumvent. There's a circumvent of the network and different things that students will still be able to have access. You know, if you have a tablet that's mobile activated, they can access the same things. And are we really going to be able to govern a student in class or in a classroom or in a school setting that has their own device that's attached to either their own network? So we really need to examine our bring your own device and make a decision about whether that is going to be allowed within our school buildings instructionally. And I think there's a part within the policy that kind of speaks to that a little bit. On page 4, where we may need to discuss that in terms of how does that going to, do we really want that? Do you really want that as a board? And it's going to be also something that if we do allow that the reporting of it, and if they're accessing things, that it could be out of compliance with that policy that you're creating. Yeah.
It would be, you know, that's the only. I do that a lot. The only devices that are exceptions are those that are provided by the school district. And so if they have their laptop or tablet on, they're already violating the policy. And it's not just the policy, it's the law.
Right.
But it is something that the board really should talk about, and you don't have to adopt it this week, because you do have the summer to figure out what you want to do with this policy and how you want it to work. For example, with elementary, do you have cubbies? Do you have, you know, you have to, you know, determine how they're going to, you know, maintain their devices in the classroom. They're only in one classroom generally, so.
That was one of the feedbacks that Mr. McGrath gave, was should we just be more generic in our language? You know, suppose we don't buy Yonder, we buy another brand, then you have to go back and change the policy. Elementary school sometimes.
You don't have to, you can say Yonder pouches or similar.
Or similar,
You don't
okay.
have to say Yonder pouches.
Okay, and then the other thing was about the BYOD, like the bring your own device is going to be, we need to adjust, and the
at
board
that.
needs to decide if that's, because it's in violation of the policy. And it's also something that parents need to be aware of now, before we start the next school year, that you cannot bring your own device. And our network will allow for us not to allow devices that are not ours on our network. So it just helps us from a cybersecurity standpoint, but I think it's definitely something, that's the one part of the policy that we, you know, that we need a clear decision on some of that.
Vic?
So that was, you kind of answered my question, but I want to say it again, just so I understand it. Do the Chromebooks right now work off of a VPN?
No, they work off of they're tied to, I'm trying to think of how to answer.
Sorry.
They're allowed to be on our network.
Okay.
So each device has the ID, I know what they're doing, I can track it. Once you bring another device into our network that is not from us, I can't monitor it.
So I think that's the scary part, right? Because how would we actually measure that?
Yeah.
Because these kids are not stupid. And they definitely know how to do certain things. But again, how would we even measure that? I don't know how.
So you're talking about the annual reporting requirement?
I'm saying, like, let's say you go to the high school and they're walking in and they don't catch it. And then they're in 5th period and they're on it. Like, it's, the discussion I think has to be like how we actually monitor and enforce it, because that's a tough task for anybody.
Well, I think that the high schools and the middle schools right now are, I know that I probably can pull a report of disciplinary actions attached to technology. There has been an uptick with the implementation of yonder pouches, where students maybe have them out during the day when they're not supposed to. So we have some baseline data before the law changed. I think the implementation of yonder helped us be a little bit ahead of it because they know the expectation. The next caveat, because now we're kicking it up another notch, is that we're saying you cannot have your own laptop. And I think that that was the loop around for a lot of kids. And I think that that is why the governor said, okay, we're going to say this is not great for the educational setting in general. So I think that that's why the law was created in that manner, to try to really make sure that students are focused on instruction.
Just one follow-up and then, my other suggestion maybe for the discussion is, I'm not positive right now what our policy is or the rules are if, let's say, my daughter's phone gets broken on school property. Who is liable for that? So I don't know if there's maybe a conversation with parents saying that if your personal device is here and it gets broken or stolen or whatever the circumstance is, then the liability falls back on the parent. I just don't know.
Yes, I think that's what it says.
That's what it says in the policy.
It does? Okay.
That's in the electronic devices policy, and I think that I have asked Mr. McGrath to look, to make, because there's always a cross-reference on several policies, to look through this to see if there was other things that were impacted and to communicate that with the board if there's other policies. And it would mean rewriting a couple of other policies and regulations that are attached to this, including the code of conduct. So it's something also that needs to be updated in the code of conduct.
Awesome, thank you.
Absolutely. Also, the law says that you cannot suspend a student solely if they access the internet on an internet-enabled device. You can discipline them if they do other things while the internet-enabled device is on, or if they're not following your acceptable use policy, or if they make threats. But and that's in the law itself. You could confiscate, you can have a meeting, you can require the parents to come in and meet. There are things you can do, you just can't suspend.
Margot, can you send us that language just to make sure that the code of conduct, people that are revising that?
I think it's in the policy.
It's in the policy? Okay, thank you.
Ray?
Thank you, Madam President. With us having the yonder pouches now for a full school year, what did discipline look like in this last year with breaches of the policy, people bringing their own devices, doing silly things? Was there an uptick? What did it look like this year?
I think that part of the management, which I think we're going to see another uptick. I can, provide the board with that data and what we saw in terms of electronic devices and discipline rates. I think what the concern that I have, and I know that building administration is going to have, is that Chromebooks and the BYOD devices during their free time, whether that was in the library or during our free period, were utilized. So now this law is going to prohibit that. So that is where I think the concern is going to be, explaining to students now, like you had your yonder patches, you were on your personal device during your lunchtime, now you can't have your personal device. That is where I think we're going to see the uptick in discipline.
It may be initially, but they will have to get used to it.
And this is where us getting that information out and the expectations for the students as early as possible and as often as possible is really, really important, because you'll tell them 5, 10 times and they'll also say, I never heard of that,
Well, this is new. This is a little different, and we don't have much choice in the matter.
I think too, a big part of the community conversation was that they didn't know. And I can understand how that would happen. So whatever the board has to do to ensure that the parents are getting the information and instilling that, I think that's a big conversation.
I definitely think that the communication part, I went to Horizons yesterday, and a 5th grader told me, you're the lady that took away our YouTube. It was actually very, I was like, wow, like she knew that I took away her YouTube, but a lot of the laws are changing. Like this law was just signed and it's at the state education department where these are coming down to govern over the school districts. But I do agree, though we notified, I think that if we have the discussion and we start talking about it throughout the summer to prepare parents for September.
So what's the pleasure of the board, of the committee? Are we moving this to the board for discussion?
Yeah, I think a first read and discussion, right?
Okay.
We're moving forward with this use of internet devices that Margot did, not the NISBA draft policy, correct?
I don't like the NISBA draft policy personally.
Okay, so just make sure everyone has a copy.
Yeah, it's on board, it was on board docs when it went out.
Okay.
Both of those are on there.
And Matthew, I may tweak that also, and I'll send it to you, but it's substantially the way it will be.
And this is a first read for this one?
And a discussion,
First
yeah,
read.
it needs a good discussion.
First
Okay,
read and
perfect.
discussion. Lastly, item 1.04, the NISBA 4000 policies for review. Did anyone have any questions or comments?
Just confirming this was the NISBA policies that were reviewed with our attorneys.
Yes.
Most of them, there were no real changes. I would say the majority didn't have any changes.
Yes, and the ones that did have changes, they were not earth-shattering changes. They were just basically to make it legally proper. Although in one of them where it says there were no changes, there was a change, so. And that was 4,200, so. But there really are not a lot of changes, and there aren't. But there is a new policy, and that's the restraints and what do you call it, rooms. Yeah. And that's updating what you had, so. And I
While
guess
you're looking, I just,
it's at the end. It's a physical restraint and timeout rooms, and that's 432112, and that's towards the end, and they have a regulation, and they have a policy, and frankly, it's all prescriptive from the law and the regulations. There's not a lot of leverage there. You can't do a lot.
I just wanted to emphasize, sorry. Onyx. I just want to emphasize, I want, and I hope all parents really read this policy that we have thoroughly when you have time to sit down and dissect it, the 4321. It has a lot of information in there, and I know that multiple community members have come up and questioned things that are directly in this policy, so this is the policy 4321.
Oh, that's the one for students with disabilities. Yes, don't forget, there are so many decimal points with these policies that you have to.
So I said, make sure you have the time.
Okay, so we'll move this, do we have, oh, Ms. Peterson?
I definitely also want to make sure that the board is also aware in this policy, especially for our exceptional learner student, that we're then also passing. Usually the amount of services, where has been customary COVID, they went back and said, okay, we want 22, that this policy does allow us to provide education to students to their 22nd birthday, when the compulsory age ends for school districts at 21, so then it's at cost. So that's a board decision. I just want to make sure that we're aware of that.
And when I read it, I think it had to do with the actual month of the birthday. I think it was like a specific, yeah. It's usually they're just their 21st.
22nd, but it was till their 21st, to the June 30th of their
Right.
21st. So we're saying to the June 30th of their 22nd. So there's an
But
addition.
only for eligible special ed students.
Only
so
for-
that
okay.
has to be- You have to be very
You
careful.
have to be very clear about that, and that's a funding thing. So there's a
And
question
that
I'll
might
put up.
also be in your policy about compulsory ages of education.
Right, but I think our policy for compulsory age of education is 21. That's
You're
what I'm saying.
correct.
That might be another,
Yes, we should
we
probably
need to cross-reference that one as well.
amend it.
Right. But for special education, that is at the cost of the community, just so that you know, that you guys are aware of that.
So the consensus to move it forward for discussion, the 4,000?
Are you going to only move forward the ones that are being amended, or are you going to move all of them and just mark them reviewed?
I would like the district to cross-reference those to make sure that we know exactly what we're working with before that goes forward. If that makes sense.
I think that there's certain ones, right, Margot, correct me if I'm wrong, like I know the physical restraint one,
You don't, yes.
we don't, there's certain ones that we don't have that we really should be, though we follow what the law is as a district, we should have a board policy surrounding it. So I think we still are gonna be cross-referencing and looking at them. There were a couple that are newly required, right, Margot?
Well, the physical restraint and timeout rooms is relatively recent. Most of the other ones are just minor changes to them rather than wholesale new policies. Even 4321 is largely, yes, but it's largely, the same. It's just got a few tweaks.
For that one, don't we already practice something like that? It's just not in a policy?
Right, we should have we have to follow the law, right? So there was new guidelines that were brought down by the state around physical restraint and timeout rooms in terms of reporting documentation and how we track students within their, that have IEPs when those things are used, parent contact, all those things were outlined.
It's not just for students with IEPs,
Right.
it's also for students who are sort of out of control, and you
Right.
have to find a way to deal with them. So it's for all students.
Right. So
But
the-
that's a required policy.
That's required, so we don't have that. So we've been following the law because it's the law, but there should be a policy around that. And then we can put the requirements that we've implemented with safe schools and reporting as a regulation to that policy. So right now, it's kind of, we have it, but it should be attached to a board policy. So out of all of them, I know that that is definitely one of them that we should kind of review so that we can become in compliance.
And I agree with that, and you can worry about the regulation afterward as long as you have the policy in place. That's the 4321.12.
So I'm fine with moving it forward for a read and adopt, if I'm correct.
Mr. McCoy?
It would help the clerk's office in terms of maintaining the policy manual if we just bring them all to the board and go for, because when you start, this is only a read or this is only a review, it's really hard to keep track, because then I have to remember that, keep internal notes, and I can't go back to board docs, or you have people come to the podium, you haven't, that policy last time it was adopted was 1982. When I know we've looked at that and there's been no changes needed, but people don't realize that. So if we just have a new adoption date, even if there's no changes, it's just easier to track. The 4,000s are going to the board for a first reading and discussion. Okay, perfect.
Can I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
And
Second.
roll call.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.